World War II demonstrated that ground attacks by fighter-bomber aircraft could deal a knockout blow to the enemy. Strategic attacks on their supply lines, transportation system, heavy industries and airfields seriously damaged their ability to wage war. As a prelude to attack by troops on the ground, these missions were vital. The pilots that flew these missions faced a barrage of anti-aircraft fire as they flew in at low level to attack their targets. The results were devastating. At 4:15 a.m. on the 1st of September 1939, Germany launched an attack on Poland. At its spearhead was the infamous Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. Attacks from over 350 of these aircraft wreaked havoc on Poland's airfields, supply lines and war factories, destroying the Poles' ability to defend themselves against the German onslaught. The Stuka would start its attack from a high altitude. It would then enter a steep dive, and just as it pulled out of that dive, the pilot would release his bombs. The scream of the aircraft and resulting destruction would prove to be overwhelming. The tactic of the destruction of supply lines and airfields from the air in tandem with a massive, fast-moving land assault was known as blitzkrieg. It would be the Germans' key tactic in the forthcoming conquest of Europe. Without adequate air support and resupply of munitions and troops, Polish resistance crumbled, and on the 28th of September, Poland was defeated. World War II had begun with an overwhelming demonstration of the power of air-to-ground strategic attacks. A new method of attack was pioneered during World War II, precision bombing. The heavy bombers would be very effective at destroying a large area, but there would be strategic advantages in being able to destroy a single target, leaving the surrounding area untouched. In order to place a bomb precisely on a target, the fighter bomber would have to fly very fast at extremely low level in order to avoid being hit by flak. The classic de Havilland Mosquito proved to be well suited to this task. The Mosquitoes would set off from airfields in Britain and would cross the sea at very low level in order to avoid enemy defenses. Targets would often be specific buildings, such as this chateau in France, being used to house German U-boat crews. The result would be devastating. This is a low-level attack on another chateau being used to house German SS troops. The best-known precision strike of the war using a fighter bomber was the raid on the prison at Amiens in northern France on the 18th of February 1944. Over 100 French patriots were there being held waiting for execution. The plan was to breach the walls of the prison and then to destroy the area of the prison where the German guards were housed. This daring mission was led by RAF Group Captain Picard. 2 squadrons of Mosquitoes took off and flew into atrocious weather over the English Channel. Fortunately, over the coast of France, the weather cleared and the attack went ahead. The mission was a success. The walls were breached and considerable damage was done to the prison. Tragically, Picard didn't return from the raid, but the amazing accuracy of the strike proved beyond doubt that precision bombing was a valuable tactic. During the final decisive stages of the war in Europe, precision ground attacks would play their most vital role. On the 6th of June 1944, the Allies launched their invasion of mainland Europe, christened Operation Overlord. It would be the greatest use of aerial power in history. The Allies had at their disposal some of the finest ground attack aircraft ever produced. The Hawker Typhoon was a tough and hard-hitting fighter bomber, armed with cannons, rockets and bombs. It proved to be one of the most deadly aircraft of the war. It was also joined by a development of the Typhoon called the Tempest. The Douglas A-20 Havoc was a versatile aircraft that flew a variety of challenging missions. Faster than the Havoc was the Douglas A-26 Invader. The North American Mustang was not only a superb fighter, but it could also turn its attention to tactical bombing and ground attack. The Martin B-26 Marauder was a medium-altitude light bomber. Probably Britain's finest light bomber of World War II was the de Havilland Mosquito. It combined speed with blistering firepower. Combined with these aircraft were the Allied heavy bombers. In fact, the forthcoming invasion could rely on the support of over 12,000 aircraft. The scene was set for the greatest use of aerial power in history. Phase 1 of the main air campaign was to smash key points in the road and rail systems of occupied France. This would effectively seal off the German troops already in the landing area. It would also prevent reinforcements from being shipped in once the invasion had started. Train busting, as it was known, became a popular pastime amongst the Allied air crews. Both the road and rail systems were severely disrupted. At the same time, targets such as E-boat bases, radar stations and coastal batteries were attacked along the French coast. Airfield attacks destroyed masses of German aircraft on the ground. Heavy bombers also attacked key strategic targets in a softening up operation that started some months before the invasion. The destruction caused by all these raids paved the way for the next phase of the operation. Phase 2 was to establish a beachhead on the landing areas on the French Normandy coast. Early on the morning of June the 6th, 1944, 1,000 B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers dropped thousands of tons of bombs on the beaches. During the briefing for Operation Overlord, General Eisenhower told his troops, "Don't worry about the aircraft overhead, they'll be ours." Under a protective cover of Allied fighters, the first Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches of France. The invasion of the mainland of Europe had begun. Allied aircraft mounted attacks on German troop positions, forcing them to take cover. Over 15,000 missions were flown on the first day, with a loss of only 100 aircraft. During the next 4 days, the Allies consolidated their position with fighter bombers attacking road convoys and trains, trying to deliver German reinforcements to the battle area. By the 10th of June 1944, the first landing strips on French soil had been built and the devastating power of the Typhoon was unleashed on the land battle. With their rocket armament, they proved deadly. In the following 3 weeks, havocs and marauders destroyed virtually every bridge across the River Seine, north of Paris. As the Germans tried to repair these, the Allied aircraft would come back to undo it all over again. The first stage of the invasion had been a success. Operation Overlord had achieved its objectives. The Allies had a foothold in France and were ready to advance into the heart of Europe. Air power had severely damaged the Germans' ability to defend against the invasion, and the skies over the Allied troops were kept free from enemy aircraft. The race for the Rhine was about to start. By the middle of August 1944, British and Canadian troops had encircled the remaining 16 German divisions in France in an area that became known as the Falaise Pocket. This is where air power virtually settled the liberation of France. Allied aircraft ran riot over the area, rocketing and strafing the trapped German divisions. Typhoons attacked any escape routes for the Germans. Salvo after salvo of rockets were fired at their armored vehicles. After a week of constant attacks from the air, the bulk of the German 7th Army had been virtually destroyed. The remaining troops were in retreat across France, all the time being attacked by the typhoons by day and mosquitoes by night. With the last major German presence in France eliminated, Paris was liberated on the 25th of August, 1944. But the German use of air power wasn't over yet. At first light on New Year's Day 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, using some 800 fighters and fighter bombers. The aim of the operation was to destroy Allied air bases in Belgium and the Netherlands. The attack caught the Allies almost completely by surprise, and considerable damage was done to some airfields. About 500 Allied aircraft were damaged or destroyed, but over 300 Luftwaffe aircraft were also destroyed in the raid, and more importantly, some 230 German airmen were lost. Relatively few Allied aircrews were killed in the attack. The Allies recovered their losses in just a few days, but the Germans could ill afford their losses, and the already devastated Luftwaffe was weakened still further. The attack had failed. Operation Bodenplatte was to be the final German air offensive of the war. With almost no opposition from the Luftwaffe, Allied ground attack aircraft roamed freely over Germany, steadily destroying its infrastructure. Transport links were destroyed, airfields repeatedly attacked the ability of the Reich to defend itself. It was taken apart piece by piece. In May 1945, the Germans finally surrendered and the war in Europe was over. The Germans, who had used air power so effectively in their early offensives, had been defeated in part due to the very strategies they had employed at the start of the war. During the Allies' offensive on mainland Europe, the ground attack fighter bomber had proved to be a decisive weapon in the eventual victory. The highly mobile, heavily armed attack aircraft had come of age, and its devastating firepower paved the way for the liberation of Europe.